Hi and welcome. It's Tuesday, May the 18th, and if it is Tuesday at noon, it is the Maine Take. Hi everyone, my name is Dana Connors, and this week, as every week, we take a look at the people, the policies, the issues, and the initiatives at work in our state. Last week, as many of you recall, we took a look at the issues before this year's legislature. And with the help of the Chamber's advocacy team and the CEO of Maine & Company, whose job it is to attract business to our state, we discussed a number of proposed bills that would impede our economic recovery progress and would send a chilling message, we believe, to those who may be looking to invest in our state. Well, this week, I want to continue to discuss the issues, the initiatives, but this time, those that give us hope, those that give us encouragement, those who present what we need to know about what's positive going on that helps us recover from the pandemic. And to help me do that, I am pleased to welcome back to our show, Hannah Pingree. Welcome, Hannah. It's a pleasure to have you back. This is your third run, and we would have you on much more frequently if you were simply to say yes. For those of you who don't know, and I doubt if there are a few who do not know Hannah, she was a former Speaker of the House here in the legislature and is currently the Director of the Office of Policy, Innovation, and the Future. Hannah?
And it's great to be here. Thank you so much for having me back.
Oh, no, it's our pleasure. Like I said, we'd have you on more frequently. You have so much involvement of what's going on in our state today in your leadership role. So it's a pleasure to have you with us. As I said, we spent last week looking at that negative side, the problem side, if you will, of the coin. I wanted to flip that over and look at what is positive, to the positive side of this coin. And in so doing, there are some very positive things that we can talk about. I would make the case that we were extremely fortunate, fortuitous, if you will, that even before the pandemic struck the state of Maine, we had in place a plan, a strategic plan. It was a 10-year plan that really focused on those issues that we need to coalesce around, to establish as priorities, to move the economy first. Workforce, innovation, key investments like broadband, like childcare, like research and development. And then we all know that in March, a year ago, the pandemic struck, and one of the first actions, again, in a very positive way, was Economic Recovery Committee. 37 people were asked over a course, I believe it was 7 months, to look at how we stabilize the economy at the moment, but then how do we, in the second part, grow? What are those things? Interestingly enough, and I think very positive, they looked at the very essence of the strategic plan. And I think that's served us well. The governor's insistence, and I say that in a positive way, of recognizing that a healthy economy depends upon healthy people. And now with the vaccine and other things, you can see some very positive signs as the state reopens. But the issue I really want to speak to you about today, I'd love to have you comment on any of that I've just said, but to talk about the federal dollars. I mean, first we saw the CARES Act, which was a paycheck protection program, outstanding in its worth, its value. More recently, we've seen the America's Rescue Plan Act that brought to the state $1.1 billion. A plan has been put forward that I guess I saw it described as immediate investments and their impact, more long range, and then those infrastructure. Can you explore that with me to tell the significance of it and where some of those investments would be made?
Sure, Dana. Well, I will just say thank you again for having me on, and you have set the stage very well. The governor presented just a couple of weeks ago in Madison, Maine, actually at the Go Lab manufacturing startup, the Maine Jobs and Recovery Plan. And it really is Governor Mills' roadmap for how she at least proposes to the legislature to invest this $1.1 billion in federal relief coming to the state government. I will say that money is also paired with money going to Maine counties and Maine towns. And we see this kind of investment is something that should not be squandered. It is a huge opportunity to make a game-changing difference in the future of Maine's economy, and to really make sure that we are supporting Maine communities and Maine people who have been left behind. I will say that the work of the 10-year economic plan and the governor's economic recovery committee, of which you served and you put in your time at those very early Friday morning meetings for months on end. So this is a plan that was really comes from stakeholders from across our state who really weighed in on how we should best invest in our future. We do know that the state is still, there are many portions of the state economy and state people who are struggling to recover from this pandemic, and we are still in a challenging public health situation. Obviously, Maine has been leading the country in both our public health measures as well as our vaccinations. So that's good news, and it's good news for the reopening of our economy. And we are seeing obviously very bright signs in our summer ahead, in our summer tourism season, lots of businesses coming back. So positive signs. So you talked about the sort of areas of spending well, immediate economic recovery. The governor proposes a significant plan to continue to help those businesses who are most challenged, to help them with their health insurance costs, to help them with the unemployment trust fund, which obviously is something that businesses pay, and help those businesses who've been most likely to be left behind. The governor also proposes in the immediate economic recovery realm to invest $50 million specifically in heritage industries. So our forest product sector, our agriculture sector, our seafood sector have been hit by this pandemic. They are obviously really primarily in the rural parts of our state, but there are also areas poised for just unbelievable growth that benefits Maine people and Maine communities in all kinds of ways. Next, in the economic growth sector, Dana, you did a nice job really explaining some of the high points. I would say it is about investing in the future of our economy, with research and development and targeted businesses that we think are poised for growth, as well as significant focus on our workforce. From higher education, our CTEs at our high schools, to our research institutions, we just see a real need to invest in education, but also targeted sectors. The healthcare sector, the clean energy sector, some of the biotechnology and manufacturing. We see significant growth only possible if we really make sure that our workers are ready for those opportunities. So again, a huge amount of investment in our workforce. And then the last area is infrastructure revitalization. And that really is kind of the foundation of our economy, the foundation for people. The most significant investment the governor's proposed is $150 million for broadband. And we have certainly seen during this pandemic, the people left behind on, can't tap into the Zoom screen or school or healthcare, but obviously holding our businesses in our rural areas and even our cities back by lack of quality access. Other infrastructure investments in housing and childcare and transportation, in some of our outdoor recreation sectors, sewer and water at the local level, as well as other local infrastructure. So again, I think we would describe this as transformational, game-changing funds. The governor is very focused on spending them wisely and leveraging them to do the greatest good. And so I think, we're hopeful the legislature will approve this plan and allow the governor and her administration, as well as lots of private sector partners, to help really put this money to work as soon as possible to make a difference. So again, I'm excited. I'm excited you had me on here to talk about it today. And it's we're really trying to spread the word about just how these investments could move the state forward.
So you had mentioned that, as I understand it, this is not as a bill or as a plan been presented to the legislature. They will have a role in approving, adjusting, or whatever the case may be. Is that imminent, given the time that we have left? I'm saying that with some degree of hope and expectation when I say that.
Yes, no, I mean, it's the billion-dollar question, Dana. I will say that we are hopeful, and the plan is to put a framework package that will be a legislative bill to authorize the use of these funds by late May, early June, and we're hopeful the legislature will pass it. It would be great to see bipartisan support, because that obviously allows the administration to get forward, get moving more quickly. So the plan is to bring a bill forward to authorize the use of these funds.
Great. And you know that there is value in everything. Sometimes you have to look a little harder in certain instances, but as challenging as the pandemic has been, it brought to light the very essence of the strategic plan, reinforced the value of broadband. I mean, we had received, what was it, 15 million a couple of years ago, realizing that it's a long path forward if we get that every single year. Now, all of a sudden, Senator King helped shepherd through 120, you've got 150 here. All of a sudden, that's a real statement that can be made. And Heather's going to be on a webinar with the senator this Friday, put on by the chamber, to actually talk more about the plan and the significance of moving this issue forward. In the same way that childcare, I mean, we always saw childcare as an issue, but boy, the pandemic brought that front and center, the same way it has so many things like housing and so forth. So they all seem to be investments in the type of needs that do not require sustainable funding necessarily. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, I mean, and I think everything, I mean, clearly when you invest in infrastructure and you do a good job building it, it has a long lasting impact. This plan has specific money for pre-K and childcare infrastructure, especially targeting rural areas that have a real gap for families, certainly making it more difficult for families to return to work. So yes, I definitely agree. When you can build it and you can make it sustainable, it has a long-term impact. I will say we've talked a lot about the $1 billion, but the overall federal American Rescue Plan offers other streams of funding. For example, for our K-12 schools to get them reopened and help kids catch up. It has over $120 million targeted at our early care system. So significant funding to help those childcare facilities that have really struggled over the last year. So we're trying to make sure we use all of these varying federal funding streams in the wisest way possible to move the state forward. Some of them will require long-term investments, but lots of these things are kind of, you make a one-time investment in infrastructure like broadband, for example, and you hope it lasts a long time and does a lot of good.
Yeah, another area that you mentioned that I want to spend just a couple of minutes on, because workforce today has been challenged by the essence of supply, not demand. I mean, there is such a demand for workforce. It's universal throughout our state. I really it appears to me that you really put a spotlight on the workforce issue, the commitment to career technical education, to higher ed and the community college, to the whole clean energy sector, but also an element within the strategic plan that I think deserves attention is called, I believe, the career exploration concept that says the seniors, and I think it's seniors in first year of college, anyways, a couple of years that we want to make sure that they experience an internship in the type of companies that really appeal to them. I think that is so significant, because so often those who intern end up with that company that they've had that internship with. I think it's very significant.
Yeah, no, I mean, Dana, you explain why it's such a good idea. Well, I mean, I think Heather Johnson's vision, as she explained the economic plan, is how do we really help kids in Maine, starting even at a young age, understand the career opportunities available to them. And, especially in some of our more rural parts of our state, some kids just don't know what's out there, and to help them really see what's possible, and that, careers like electrical and engineering or have so much potential for our state and good paying jobs. And I think the idea of making those jobs exciting, really connecting them to both education and then internship, I think they create long lasting sort of inspiration for kids to really understand what's out there. Actually, it's a great example of that career exploration program is in this plan. And we are working actually across the governor's children's cabinet, so a wide range of agencies, to really think about those youth who are more likely to be left behind. But we can't afford any kid in Maine to be left behind. We need those kids to be engaging in our economy and understanding the potential of what's out there. So again, that's sort of a crucial linchpin of our early workforce. Maine doesn't have enough kids. We continue to be the oldest state in the country. So again, we can't lose any kid to be lost and not entering our workforce in sort of the highest and best way possible.
Well said. And the whole package is a very encouraging boost to our recovering economy, because there's a lot of, you see it every day. There's a lot of encouragement out there. There's a lot of people feeling incredibly positive, and you can see it in the consumer spending. I mean, that's probably as good a mark of how well we're doing is when the consumer confidence is up and the spending follows it. Oh, it's very good. In the few minutes we have left, I want to switch your time and attention to the fact that the supplemental budget is available to us now. It's being worked on as we speak. That $500 million that takes it from 8.3 to 8.8 has had some criticism because of the size and the sustainability of it, as well as like homestead or other issues that weren't necessarily included. But it does speak to 3 or 4 issues I'd like to have you speak to that we've not had the advantage in the past, like educational funding, revenue sharing, and some of the other things that are in that may get adjusted in the process of the legislature review. But nevertheless, they do stand out as something that we've tried to accomplish, but never quite got there.
Yeah, no, I mean, again, you did a good job giving the overview. I mean, I think obviously, first of all, it's a good sign for our economy that revenues have rebounded. I think there are signs certainly of consumer confidence. Certainly increasing home sales in Maine have helped to drive some of the revenue that's coming into the state. And that's, again, obviously we're seeing lots of changes in our state over the last 1 and 2 years. I think this governor has taken this opportunity, as you noted, to really do some things that haven't been possible before. So she funds 55% of the cost of education for local communities. She puts revenue sharing back up to 5% in the second year of the biennium. She increases the property tax refund program. So I would say all 3 of those things together really are about providing relief to property taxpayers and also investing in local education. Again, those are things that allow people to stay in Maine, certainly support our schools to do good work. I'd say that's probably the highlight of the budget. There are other tax provisions where we conform to federal changes to help especially families and low-income people who've been struggling to recover. There are funds going into the budget and Medicaid stabilization fund. The budget stabilization fund now if this budget is passed with the governor's proposal at the highest point in Maine history. And I will say there's a significant investment in Medicaid reform, making sure that providers are getting fairly reimbursed to provide the services. Again, something that's been a challenge in their ability to pay workers what they need to retain them. So lots of different provisions. We expect vigorous and fair debate in the legislature. But I actually think that it's a fairly balanced package that, certainly helps the state continue to recover and focuses on those who are struggling the most.
Yeah. Well, as always, you are a pleasure to have on. You always inform the public in ways that I think they truly understand and appreciate, and that's a gift, that's a skill, and you do it very, very well. But before you go, I want to make sure that if there's something else that you wanted to speak to in either of those areas that you're given the opportunity, then I have one last thing to share with you as well.
No, I think, Dana, we've covered it. I would just say, though, that obviously the legislature is heading into a very busy 30 or so days ahead. And if anything about these 2 packages makes sense to you, please be sure to tell your local legislator why these things make sense.
We most certainly will. The item that I wanted to share with you before we leave has something to do with the 2 programs that we've just today been a part of, but we completed last week. And that is that there's a number of I'll use the term progressive bills before the legislature, and a number of troubling bills that we have confronted this session. In part, I think it's a numbers game, but it's also, you just don't have that access. But I always remember the advice that you gave me several years ago when you were Speaker of the House. I probably was complaining in a similar fashion about the number of bills and the problems associated with them. When you said to me, Dana, don't judge the success or failure of a legislative session by the number of bills that are proposed. Judge them by the number of bills that are passed. I've never forgotten that, because that is the truth. It's hard to appreciate that right now when we're in the heat of the battle and you see what they can do to an economy that's trying to recover, and we're on a very positive path. But it's important that we keep that in mind and we judge it in the final stages, not at the early stages. So I thank you for the advice.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you remembered it. It is wise, and I will say, as we all try to navigate this complicated legislature, and there are thousands of bills, I feel your pain, and I hope that my advice rings true in a positive way in late June.
Thank you, Hannah. Your advice always rings true. We appreciate it. Take
Great.
care.
Thank you again, Dana. Have a good day.
Bye-bye. Now I want to turn our attention to our legal counsel here at the State Chamber, as well as does a lot of lobbying for us in the area of the environment and energy and workforce. Ben, as you've heard, there is a priority that has been placed by, in particular, the America's Rescue Plan. That $1.1 billion has close to $180 million that goes towards workforce. I want you to react to that in terms of what you've heard here today and the takeaway, the value of that, but also the very point that I think I made early on, which is today in the workforce, the issue is really not one of demand. Businesses throughout the state are just simply hurting for employees. The issue is supply, how to get them, where they come from, and to the degree you're hearing that $300 bonus on top of unemployment has become an impediment. You heard that the childcare issue, because two parents who were working, one of them has to stay home. That's a problem. So there's more than one reason, but nevertheless, those two that I mentioned, but probably others, are contributing to a workforce shortage when the demand is high. So let's take the first question now. What was your reaction to what you heard Hannah speak to today about workforce?
Well, I think in terms of workforce, it's really encouraging. And it goes back to the governor's 10-year strategic plan, which one of the three goals in there was to attract 75,000 people into our workforce here in the state of Maine. And at the time when that was contemplated, it was like, how are we going to do that? Now with the influx of funds and you can see how they're being spent, I think it's really encouraging, because one of our workforce supply issues is the training that we have in our workers. It's not only a supply issue, it's a skill issue as well. And I think a lot of these workforce dollars that we just heard Hannah speak of are going to be put to good use. Now, you want to use just two examples to kind of drill down a little bit. One was in that $180 million for workforce. If you look, there's $20 million for career and technical education here in the state of Maine. That's going to be an important vehicle, I think, as a state, the 27 career and technical education centers from around Maine, to develop those skills for those people to enter the workforce directly with a certificate of value. It could be a license. It could be some sort of certificate that encourages, that increases their earning potential. And you go even a little bit further as well. You look at renewable energy. We know we have a lot of projects in the state of Maine looking at renewable energy, specifically solar. We went from a demand of about 30 projects to over 500 in a short period of time, but we need the workforce to keep up with that as well. And there's $8.5 million to look at the training for workers. Those are your electricians, general laborers as well, which there's also trainings and designers and everything. So there's money there to do the training, to partner with the career and technical education centers and the community colleges to produce the workforce we need to meet our renewable energy goals. So from a workforce standpoint, even though the supply, we have an issue right now, it is encouraging, I think, as we look long-term, because we're going to have the ability now to develop those projects to attract those workers to Maine with some of these programs as well, that if you want to work on renewable energy, Maine's the place to be. Come to training and you can work here as well. So I think from from that perspective, what Hannah said today was very encouraging. And I think we're going to be able to take some positive steps forward with our workforce development here in the state.
One of the things that, I come from Aroostook County, and for as long as I can remember, while many people in the South may not know it, we're on a separate system when it comes to our power, our electricity, and so forth. And there's a bill this year in the legislature that would attempt to fix that issue. Can you talk about that? That's within your area. So.
Sure, yeah. I mean, that's LD 1710 that's having a public hearing this week. And it's going to do just what you said, is address the issue that for a long time, connecting northern Maine to southern Maine or our electric grid. A lot of people don't realize that, but a lot of the power in northern Maine comes from the Canadian counterparts because they're not connected to us. There's a gap there. And LD 1710 not only looks to address that by putting out an RFP to get a project going in order to connect northern Maine to southern Maine, but that will also allow development up in northern Maine for projects of renewable energy that are being proposed up there, whether it be wind or biomass or in the forestry industry. They can now deliver their power to the southern market. So if we put it in the lens of the governor's strategic plan as well, I mean, this is a perfect piece of legislation. It's bipartisan. Everyone supports it because it makes all the sense of the world. It's been a long time coming, but those three goals of increasing wages by 10%, increasing worker production by 10%, and growing our workforce by 75,000 individuals. You look at LD 1710, it meets all those criteria. Yeah. It's increase our production. It's going to increase the demand for workers, and it's going to increase, wages and salaries in those areas, because those jobs with those skills for renewable energy in Aroostook County are going to grow the wages. So it's one of those bills that fits nicely in the governor's 10-year economic plan. And as you know, a lot of people in the southern part of the state don't realize we're not connected to the northern part of the state. It's a long time coming, and seeing the people that are sponsoring the bill, it's sponsored by Senate President Jackson. The governor's office is behind it. You have Senator Stewart, who's a Republican on the Energy Committee that represents the Presque Isle area. Seeing them all row in the same direction is very encouraging and gives us hope that this piece of legislation can move forward during this legislative session.
Yeah, I'd also take this opportunity in the minute we have left to actually also call out the value that the Pine Tree Zone has provided our state as an incentive for growing our economy. And while that was an issue this year because it had been sunset, it has been at least moved out of committee, which we would hope would also see the same encouragement when it gets to the full body of being forwarded for another 2 years, or approved, I should say, for another 2 years. So there are some good things. We don't ignore those. We don't overlook them. But clearly today, what we spoke about in terms of that America's Rescue Plan and the investments that are being made clearly do not only speak to the strategic plan, but by doing so, really help to recover and to grow our economy. And that's what's good news for all of us. So Ben, thank you. As usual, you did a great job, and we appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you, Dana.
For a continuation of good news, I am going to turn to our friend and have Peter Van Allen, who's the editor of Mainebiz, tell us what's on his agenda. Peter.
Thanks, Dana. As always, very interesting conversation leading up to this. It's just so interesting to hear what's going on in Augusta, and particularly from Hannah's perspective. That's some really interesting points. It's going to be interesting to watch. I wanted to talk just about something that's somewhat related to this. Our main story, our lead story today in the Mainebiz daily email was about the new director at the Maine Venture Fund. And the Maine Venture Fund is kind of part of this ecosystem. For people that don't know, it's sort of part of this startup ecosystem. So a startup that is just getting going might go to the Maine Technology Institute and get either a grant or maybe eventually a loan. Then they might go to the Finance Authority of Maine, and they get something larger. They're getting outside financing, and they need the financing guaranteed. They'd go to FAME. And then at that kind of next level, they'd go to the Maine Venture Fund, which would take an equity stake. They'd offer capital for an equity stake in the company. And so it's an interesting part of this ecosystem. So their director John Burns, he's been there 20 plus years, is going into semi-retirement, I guess he's calling it. But the new director coming in is a really interesting guy. He's a Vermonter. His name is Joe Powers. He's 38 years old, so he'll bring a lot of kind of youthful energy, which is needed. I had a chance to talk to him this morning. He's a very interesting guy. He's worked at all kinds of different startups, but one of the most interesting startups he worked for is Tesla Motors. He was at Tesla for 6 years in California. This is before they had even launched their first vehicle. He started there in 2006, their first electric vehicle. I mean, now you see them everywhere, but their first vehicle came out in 2008. And he describes the environment when he got there as, you know, they had 100 engineers, but they were basically in a garage. And by the time he left 6 years later, they had launched their first vehicle to the marketplace, and they had 4,000 employees. They had moved to Palo Alto, and of course by now, you know, they're a juggernaut. He obviously he's not responsible. You know, he's only part of the success story there, but he sees, you know, him coming in. We see him coming into Maine as a good sign that he definitely knows that kind of pulse of a startup and what it takes to really get a company going. So I think it'll be very interesting.
Oh, I think it's very fortuitous. I think it comes at a time when we need it the most. You know, that type of capital investment. Capital is always an issue, and to have that type of experience as well as energy, I think will work well. I also commend you because in your recent audition, you explored a number of small businesses that have had to adjust and to do so successfully. I think that was a very encouraging piece of work. And I think for people that read it and see it, I think it, again, reinforces the resilience and the capacity of Maine people and their commitment to do whatever it takes to get the job done. So once again, hats off to you, buddy. Appreciate it. Nice to see you.
Thank you so much, Dana. It's always a pleasure.
Yeah, pleasure's ours. Thanks, Peter.
Thank you.
Now for this week's takeaway, let me reflect a bit on what we have heard. Let me begin by looking back before we move forward and to remind us that last week's program, we really explored the importance of that relationship between the employer, the employee, and the economy. The fact that you really do have to consider each of them, but you also have to understand the dependence of each to the other. That success has to come to all of them in order for all of them to be successful, not just one, but all. The focus actually to explore that was we looked at the number of bills that were being considered and their impact. Currently in play as we looked at and reviewed the first session of the 130th legislature. I think it's fair to say that many, if not most, created barriers to recovering and growing our economy. They would clearly bring forward an increased cost of doing business. They would certainly discourage investment that is so needed that Peter just spoke to in terms of that venture capitalist. And it would come at a time when the state is, I believe, successfully recovering from the challenges of this past year experienced by the pandemic. And those bills could set us back as opposed to moving our state forward. None of us really want to see that, to be sure. Today, we flipped that coin over and we examined what the efforts are that are in place to give us that hope and encouragement, the effort to move our state forward. You have to begin with the significance of the strategic plan. The fact that it was put in place has set for us a direction, a set of priorities around workforce innovation, as well as those key investments. This was before the pandemic. And yet it was so foretelling because when the Economic Recovery Committee came to be, and those 37 people over the course of 7 months took to heart the task before them. What do we do in the first stage of stabilizing? What do we do in the second stage of growing the economy? And clearly they did that by relying upon the strategic plan and the essence of what was contained within it. And clearly, as we said also, that the governor's priority on knowing that a healthy economy depended on healthy people was very significant. Along came the vaccines, the vaccinations rates, which are encouraging. Consumer spending is up. That's a very positive sign. The hospitality industry that struggled so badly last year until it started to turn around in the month of August. This year, while they're still not out of the woods, there's encouraging signs. Bookings are up, the state is open. The governor's, as of the 24th, commitment to open the state capacity-wise, outdoors as well as indoors when it comes to mask wearing, are all signs of encouragement. And certainly you can't overlook that pent-up demand that we all have, that we want to get out and we want to do things like we weren't able to do this past year. Today we spoke about how that $1.1 billion really does shore up our economy and help us recover in a very significant way by focusing on what the Economic Recovery Committee set forth as priorities, what was contained within the strategic plan. Again, let me state, we are so fortunate that that strategic plan was in place, that developed for us a set of priorities not to be denied, and clearly lens through which we should be evaluating. Yes, the supplemental budget is perhaps a little more in debate at the moment. The question is sustainability. The question is, do we have time? And also the fact that it goes to $8.8 billion. That will be the debate in the coming weeks. And clearly, perhaps all of that we've talked about today is why Moody's and C&N, when they looked at where Maine is today and compared it to pre-pandemic times, said that we're 85% to where we were. That's significant. Not to be lost on us, that 15% is still out there we need to be concerned about. Well, it's not over until it's over. That's what Yogi Berra reminds us of. But I will say that the promise of today can be minimized by the issues we discussed last week that are still in play. I think we're all hopeful that when we come together and work together, which is our wish in these next few weeks before the legislature finally adjourns, that they'll come to understand the value, the importance of what we said at the outset. Success comes when you consider the employer, the employee, and the economy as one, not as three separate parts, but all working in the interest of the other. They are inseparable. That's how we see it. And that's the takeaway for this week. Once again, we thank you for being with us. We thank our sponsors. We thank our guests. And we look forward to seeing you right back here next Tuesday. In the meantime, take care of yourself and take care of one another. Have a good week. Bye-bye.